If your manager hands you a write-up and your immediate response is, "I'm not signing that," you may be focusing on the least important part of the entire document. Because here's what a lot of employees don't realize. Refusing to sign a write-up usually doesn't make the write-up disappear. Your signature is not a veto, and depending on what the document actually says, signing it may not even mean that you agree with the write-up. But, and this is important, that does not mean you should blindly sign whatever your employer puts in front of you. So if you're ever sitting across from your manager or HR with the disciplinary form in front of you, I want you to understand exactly what the signature means, what happens if you refuse to sign, and what I would actually recommend you do if the write-up is wrong. Because there is a much better way to fight an inaccurate write-up than simply saying, "I'm not signing this." Let's start with the biggest misconception. There are really three separate things happening when an employee receives a write-up. The employer is issuing discipline, the employee is receiving the document, and potentially the employee is agreeing with what's written on it. Those are not necessarily the same thing, and that's why the very first thing I would tell an employee to do is incredibly simple. Read the language directly above the signature line. Not just the allegations, not the big bold words that say written warning. A disciplinary form might say something like this. Employee signature acknowledges receipt of this document and does not necessarily indicate agreement with its content. If that's what the form says, then signing it isn't necessarily you saying, "Yes, I did this. Everything my manager wrote is correct." You're acknowledging, "I received this document." That distinction matters. Now, every form isn't written the same way, which is exactly why I would never tell someone, "Just sign it." I would tell them, read what you're signing. Because if the document says you're acknowledging receipt, that's one thing. If the document says you're admitting misconduct, agreeing to particular conditions, that's a completely different conversation. So before you make the decision to sign or refuse to sign, figure out what the signature actually represents. Now, let's say you completely disagree with the write-up. You push it back across the table and say, "I'm not signing this." What happens? A lot of employees seem to believe that if they refuse to sign, somehow the write-up can't officially happen. That's generally not how workplace discipline works. Your employer can still discipline and document that the conversation occurred. In fact, one of the things employers are specifically encouraged to do is document the reasons behind the disciplinary action. The EEOC recommends that employers document the reasons for discipline or termination because those records may become important if the decision is later challenged as discriminatory. So imagine this situation. Your manager gives you a written warning. You refuse to sign it. Your manager says, "Employee declined to sign." Maybe another manager or HR witnessed the conversation. The document still exists. The meeting still definitely happened. And the employer can still maintain its record that the discipline was issued. Which brings me to the sentence I want people to remember from this video. Your signature is not a veto. Refusing to acknowledge that you received the document does not automatically erase the employer's documentation. And sometimes employees become so focused on refusing to sign that they completely miss the bigger opportunity sitting right in front of them. Because if the write-up is actually wrong, I don't want you to spend your time fighting the signature. I want you to fight the facts. This is where I think employees can handle discipline much more strategically. Let's say the write-up says, "Michael was scheduled at 8 a.m. and arrived at 8:23 a.m. But I know that's not true. I can become angry. I can argue with my manager for 20 minutes. I can refuse to sign anything. Or I can say, I acknowledge that I received the write-up, but I disagree with the information contained in it, and I'd like to provide a written response for the record." Then my response says, "On August 4th, I was scheduled at 8 a.m. My timekeeping record reflects that I was there at 7:57, and I have attached a copy of that record." That's powerful. Why? Because now we're dealing with something that can actually be examined. This is something I try to explain to employees and managers all the time. HR can investigate facts. Dates, times, emails, text messages, policies, specific conversations. What becomes much harder to do with anything is this. My manager is always out to get me. She's toxic. He doesn't like me. They always treat me unfairly. Those feelings may be completely genuine, but if you want someone to review what happened, give them something that they can evaluate. So if you believe a write-up contains inaccurate information, your rebuttal should be more factual than the write-up itself. And this applies to managers too. If you're writing someone up and your documentation says he has a bad attitude, that's terrible documentation. What does bad attitude mean? What happened? What did they actually do? When did it happen? Who witnessed it? What expectations did they fail to meet? The employee should be dealing in facts, and the employer should too. The EEOC's own guidance for employers reviewing complaints about disciplinary action recommends looking at why discipline occurred and comparing how employees involved in similar situations were treated. That's how a meaningful review happens, not manager says one thing, employee says the manager is lying, everyone goes home angry. People ask this one a lot. Can you sign and write, "I disagree"? Potentially, but again, read the form. If there's an employee comment section, use it. If you're permitted to provide a written response, which you are, that can be much more powerful than squeezing in there, "I do not agree with this." Because what exactly have we established? That you disagree. Okay, why? That's the important part. If you're going to dispute the discipline, explain exactly what is inaccurate. Maybe the write-up says you have violated the policy. Okay, which policy? Ask to review it. Maybe it says you were previously coached about this issue. You weren't? Say that. Maybe it says 3 employees witnessed the incident. You know someone who else was present? Identify them. Maybe the timeline is completely wrong. Provide the correct timeline. This doesn't mean write a 4-page emotional defense of your entire employment history. Sometimes the strongest employee response is 5 sentences long. Specific, professional, factual. That's it. Here's where employees need to be careful. If an employer is simply asking you to acknowledge receipt of the disciplinary notice, and company policy or legitimate workplace instruction requires that acknowledgement, refusing can potentially create an additional workplace issue depending on the circumstance. That's why I don't love the automatic response of, "I don't agree with it, I'm refusing to sign anything." Because disagreement and acknowledgement are 2 different things. You don't want to turn one dispute into a second dispute simply because you misunderstood what your signature meant. Now, I'm deliberately not telling you you have to sign it, because workplace policies differ. Union agreements can matter, the language on the document matters, state law matters, and most importantly, what you're actually being asked to sign matters. So don't make this ideological, make it practical. Ask, does my signature mean that I received this document, or does it mean that I agree with the allegations? That is a perfectly reasonable question. And this is probably the most important qualifier in the entire video. Everything I've been talking about so far is an ordinary disciplinary acknowledgement. I am not telling you to blindly sign every document an employer puts in front of you. There's a big difference between I acknowledge that I received this written warning and I agree that I committed this misconduct. And I would slow down even more if the document contains something beyond ordinary discipline. For example, language saying you're voluntarily resigning, a waiver or a release, a last chance agreement with specific consequences, a severance or separation agreement, an admission of misconduct, or any document where you genuinely don't understand what rights or obligations you're accepting. At that point, we're no longer talking about simply acknowledging that your manager handed you a piece of paper. We're talking about an agreement. Read agreements before you sign them. And if the consequences are significant and you don't understand the document, that may be the point where getting individualized advice makes sense. There are also a couple of situations where discipline can involve additional legal protections. The first is retaliation. Let's say an employee recently complained about discrimination, participated in an EEO investigation, or engaged in some other legally protected activity. That doesn't mean the employee can never be disciplined again. That's another misconception. The EEOC specifically explains that engaging in protected EEO activity does not shield an employee from legitimate discipline reasons. But an employer can also not discipline someone because they engaged in protected activity. That distinction, again, is incredibly important. So if the circumstances surrounding a write-up suggest discrimination or retaliation, the issue may become much bigger than, should I sign this? The second situation involves union-represented employees. Under what's commonly known as the Weingarten rights, a union-represented employee may request union representation during an investigatory interview when the employee reasonably believes the interview could lead to discipline. Notice the wording there. Investigatory interview. That's not necessarily the same thing as a meeting where management is simply informing you of a discipline that has already been decided. So if you're represented by a union, your collective bargaining agreement and your representational rights can create another layer that employees in a non-union workplace may not have. So the question, do you have to sign a write-up? I actually think there's a better question. What exactly are you being asked to acknowledge? Because we've talked about those aren't always the same thing. If the signature simply acknowledges that you received the write-up, signing it may not mean that you agree with a single word your manager wrote. And refusing to sign it doesn't make some magic loophole that makes the disciplinary record disappear. So if you believe the write-up is wrong, don't just fight the signature, fight the facts. Ask what your signature means, read the document, ask to provide a response, correct inaccurate information, give dates, times, documents, identify witnesses, and make your response professional enough that if somebody who knows absolutely nothing about the situation reads the file 6 months from now, your side of the story makes sense. Because yelling, "I'm not signing that," might feel powerful in the moment, but a factual, well-documented response is usually far more useful. Read before you sign, understand what your signature means, and if you're going to disagree, disagree with facts. I'm Michael with OTE HR Insight. I'll see you in the next one.